From the pulpit of the First Baptist Church of Dallas, Texas, this is Pathway to Victory with Dr. Robert Jeffress.
Hi, I'm Robert Jeffress, and welcome again to Pathway to Victory. If you've ever looked up at the night sky full of stars or gazed at the range of majestic mountains, then you've probably asked yourself the question, where did it all come from? Well, we have lots of evidence for the existence of God. And today I'm going to explore the origins of God and the universe as revealed in Scripture. We're answering the question, how can I know there is a God? On today's edition of Pathway to Victory. Last time we began a series entitled, How Can I Know? Answers to Life's 7 Most Important Questions. And we begin by looking at the most foundational question of all, how can I know there is a God? And last time we began looking at 4 powerful arguments for the existence of God. There's the cosmological evidence, the cosmos. It's simply the question, why does anything exist? Why is it when I look around I see something instead of nothing? How do you explain something rather than nothing? You see, the atheist has this formula for what we see. No one times nothing equals everything. That is, out of nothing, and by no one's influence, everything came into existence. That's kind of preposterous, isn't it? Now, honestly, if the universe were eternal, like God is eternal, then we wouldn't say there has to be a first cause. It's eternal. It doesn't necessitate a first cause. Scientists believed for a long time that the universe was eternal. But in more recent years, they've come to adopt the popular version, we call it the Big Bang Theory. They've said there is evidence that the universe came into existence. It has not always existed. And if it came into existence, if the universe has a beginning, then there must be a first cause. That's the cosmological evidence. Why is there something rather than nothing? The second argument we're going to look at today is the teleological argument. How do you explain the complex design of the universe? Teleos, it means design. How do you explain the intricate design of the systems and things that we see in the universe? Author Dennis McCallum illustrates it this way. Imagine there are 2 men on a train, and the train is pulling into the station, and one man looks out the window and says, oh, look over there on the hillside. Look at the message. It says, welcome to Canada. Somebody sure went to a lot of trouble to make us feel welcome. The second man said, nobody designed that. That just happened by chance. Those rocks fell down the hill and formed that message by chance. That same second man, a few moments later, says to the first man, well, I guess we better go into the train station and change our currency from American currency to Canadian currency. The first man says, why should we do that? The second man says, didn't you read the sign? It says we're in Canada. Now, Dennis McCallum's point is, you can't have your philosophical cake and eat it too. You can't say everything is random that happens. We're here by chance, not by design. You can't say that and at the same time say, when you're trying to offer an alternate explanation, that there are certain laws of science that can be repeated over and over again, and there's order in the universe. You can't have one and the second observation at the same time. Where exactly do we find this evidence of design in the universe? Well, look at the universe itself. The Big Bang Theory basically says all of the universe was compacted into a mass of matter that exploded. And yet, if that mass of matter that included the entire universe, if that mass were changed by no more than what would be 1 grain of table salt, the Big Bang Theory would have never happened. If there had been one tiny variation in the amount of matter, either the Big Bang wouldn't have happened at all, or the universe would have begun to expand so rapidly there would be nothing. The universe, the massive matter. Look at the earth itself. The universe has uniquely designed planet Earth to be a place that allows for life, even though the universe as a whole seems to be hostile to the existence of life. William Dembski writes, "Imagine you discover an abandoned cabin in the mountains. As you approach the cabin, you notice something strange. Your favorite meal is cooking in the oven, the television is turned on to your favorite TV show, and all of your favorite books, DVDs, and video games are lying on the table. What would you conclude? The best explanation would clearly be that somebody was expecting your arrival. Scientists have recently learned that the universe is much like this cabin. It's crafted uniquely for us." Scientists estimate there are over 100 constants, 100 conditions that have been woven together to form a scientific welcome mat to you and me as residents of planet Earth. We'll talk about those in a moment. But among those conditions are, first of all, the size of planet Earth. The size of our planet is perfect for the existence of life. If the Earth were smaller or larger, it wouldn't have the atmosphere that could promote the proper mixture of oxygen and nitrogen. Think about the Earth's distance from the sun. It's exactly located where it needs to be. If the Earth were any closer to the sun, we'd all burn up. If it were further away, we would freeze to death. Secondly, think about the condition of water on the Earth. Our bodies are 2/3 water. Water's unique properties make it possible for us to exist. For example, water has an uncanny high boiling point, as well as an unusually high freezing point. Why is that important? It allows us to live in fluctuating temperatures like we're all experiencing right now. Water is chemically neutral. It allows food and minerals and medicines to be absorbed into our bodies. Water is absolutely essential for life, and our planet has plenty of it. 97% of the Earth's water is found in the oceans. There's one problem with that. So is salt in that water. And yet think of the design that has been made to deliver that water to us. Through evaporation, the salt is left behind. The water goes into the atmosphere and is spread throughout the world through rain, making it possible for living beings and vegetation. A third constant is gravity. Physicists tell us that for life to exist on Earth, the gravitational pull must remain constant. In fact, if the gravitational force were altered by no more than 1 in 10,000 billion parts, if there were that much variation in gravity, we couldn't exist. Think of the mixture, fourthly, of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Our atmosphere is comprised of 21% oxygen. If there was less oxygen, we would all suffocate. In the same way, the carbon dioxide level, if it were higher, the greenhouse effect would incinerate our entire planet. Now here's the question: what is the probability that these and other constants necessary for life could exist accidentally on one planet in the universe? Now, this is amazing. Astrophysicist Hugh Ross estimates that there are 122 constants that have to be present for life to exist. Ross estimates that the number of planets in the universe is 10 to the 22nd power. That's a 1 with 22 zeros behind it. Therefore, if you take the constants necessary and the number of planets in our universe, the chance that any one planet in the universe would accidentally have all 122 constants present in it, you know what the number is? The chances are 1 in 10 to the 138th power. That's a 1 with 138 zeros behind it. Now, to put that number in perspective, scientists tell us that the number of atoms in the entire universe is only 10 to the 70th power. But the chance that you could have one planet having all the constant factors necessary for life is 1 in 10 to the 138th power. You know what that's saying? The chances are 0 that any one planet in the universe would have the constants necessary. A third evidence of design is found in the cell itself. How did life begin? Well, Charles Darwin postulated that life came about when the first unicellular organism crawled out of a primordial biotic soup. It happened just by accident that this one cell came into being. Yet, Darwin himself said, quote, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly be formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down." Darwin didn't know when he wrote those words that he was signing the death certificate for the theory of evolution and his own theory of the origin of life. You see, in Darwin's day, nobody could look into the cell and see the intricacy of it. But as Michael Behe talks about in his book, Darwin's Black Box, science has allowed us to look into the cell and see what a complex organism it is. And it's also allowed us to see that you have to have some basic functioning parts all present at the same time for a cell to exist. Behe compares it to a mousetrap. You know, you can't build a mousetrap over a period of time and have it catching mice right away. You have to have some basic parts all together at once for a mousetrap to work. You have to have the little wooden platform. You have to have the spring. You have to have the slammer that knocks off the head of the mouse. You can't just put a little platform down there and then a million years later add the spring and a million years later the hammer. No, you have to have functioning parts all at the same time. And the same is true of the cell. So what is the possibility that a fully functioning cell could assemble itself together by chance? Sir Frederick Hoyle was the founding director of the Institute of Theoretical Astronomy at Cambridge University. He said, quote, "The likelihood of the formation of life from inanimate matter is 1 to a number with 40,000 zeros behind it. It is a number big enough to bury Darwin and the whole theory of evolution. If the beginnings of life were not random, they must therefore have been the product of purposeful intelligence." Now, the cell is complex enough, but consider the complexity of the design of the human body. Our bodies are more than a single cell. They are billions of cells that form thousands of different systems and organs in the human body. How does the atheist explain that? How does the atheist explain the complexity of the universe and the mathematical hurdles involved in a chance explanation? You know what he resorts to? He resorts to something called the multiple universe theory, which imagines that our universe is just one of an infinite number of universes. Now, to understand what that means, it would be like this. Let's say you took a 787 jumbo jetliner and you took it all apart and it was just a mass of nuts and bolts and wires and knobs, and you put it in a wind tunnel and you turned that wind tunnel on. How long would it take for that collection of millions of pieces of the airliner, how long would it take for it to assemble itself together into a jetliner that you would want to step on and fly on? Could there be any circumstance under which that would happen accidentally if you just turned the wind on? Well, here's what the atheist says, well, it might not ever happen in this universe, but there's an infinite number of universes. And if you have an infinite number of universes, somewhere at some time in eternity, that's going to come together for a jumbo jetliner. It's a foolish explanation. First of all, there is no evidence that there are multiple universes in existence. And secondly, even if you allow for that fanciful explanation, it basically means there's no explanation for anything that we see. There's no reason that water freezes at 32 degrees. There's no explanation for why the earth revolves around the sun or why summer follows the springtime. The late Norman Geisler wrote about the multiple universe theory this. He said, the multiple universe theory is simply a desperate attempt to avoid the implications of design. It doesn't multiply chances, it multiplies absurdities. Psalm 14:1, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. That word fool is the word we get moron from. You have to be a moron to believe all of this happened just by chance. That's the teleological arguments for the existence of the universe. Thirdly, the third piece of evidence, the anthropological evidence. Anthropos, meaning man. How do you explain the existence of man if you don't believe in God? Think about, for example, our existence, our mere existence. Think about not only our existence, but a human's consciousness. What is it that gives us an awareness, first of all, of ourselves? I love this. Alan Sandage asked the question, how is it that inanimate matter, non-living matter, how is it that inanimate matter organized itself to contemplate itself? I mean, why are we aware of our own existence? There's no explanation for that. Or think about our awareness of God. Where does that come from? Now, we say, well, the evolutionists would say we are wired to believe in God. And we would agree with that. We believe God has placed on our hearts an awareness of Him. Some people tune that out, but it's there, an awareness of God. But to say we are spiritually or biologically wired to believe in God, for the atheist to claim that is to absolutely refute his own theory of evolution. You see, part of the theory of evolution is the survival of the fittest, that we are wired in such a way only to do what is in our best self-interest. And while it's true, a belief in God has some benefits to our well-being, it also has some downsides to it. Think about giving your money. That's not operating in your best interest. Or giving your time to come and worship God. That's not in your best interest. Think about the martyrs who were tortured and beheaded and murdered in any number of gruesome ways. Their belief in God didn't lead to their immediate self-interest. And the fact is, there's no explanation for that. C.S. Lewis famously argued that our desire for God is one of the most convincing arguments for the existence of God. He wrote it and explained it this way: creatures are not born with desires unless the satisfaction of those desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. People feel sexual desire. Well, there's such a thing as sex. If I find myself in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Where's our consciousness of morality? Where does that come from? How do you explain that if we're not designed by God? Well, people say, well, we're biologically wired to know the difference between right and wrong. If it's just a case of biology, then why do we call anything evil? Why do we call abusing a child evil? Why don't we call it orange or purple? Why do we call it evil? How do we have a sense of right and wrong? The evolutionist says, well, if it's not just a case of biological wiring, every community has to decide for itself what's right and what's wrong. Cultures develop their own standard of what's right and what's wrong. That's how we determine evil and good. But can you really trust culture to tell you what is right and wrong? Can culture tell us what is evil and what is good? God has stamped on our hearts the awareness, the consciousness of good and evil. And that leads to a fourth evidence, a fourth argument for the existence of God, and that's the experiential evidence. Why do people find God if he doesn't exist? Isn't that interesting? Why do people keep finding God if he doesn't exist? Think about the 11 remaining apostles after Christ died, and the 500 witnesses, all of whom said they found, they saw, they experienced the resurrected Christ. Now, the cynic would say, well, they were looking for him. That's just the case of wish fulfillment. But the fact is, they weren't looking for the risen Christ. They didn't expect to see him. In fact, they had written him off. They thought the crucifixion on Good Friday ended all of that. If they had been expecting a resurrection, they would have been camped out at the tomb Saturday night waiting for the big day. But they weren't. And yet, the 11 apostles saw the resurrected Christ. 500 witnesses saw the resurrected Christ, even though they weren't looking for him. And by the way, it wasn't confined to them. Other people throughout history have found God, not because they were running toward him, but because they were running away from him. Think about C.S. Lewis. Even though he grew up in a religious home, he rejected Christianity, largely because it offered, he thought, no explanation for the existence of evil. And yet, by the time he entered Oxford University in 1917, he was a full-fledged agnostic. But it was during that time that he became friends with J.R. Tolkien and Owen Barfield. It was during that time that Lewis finally abandoned his agnosticism and surrendered on his knees to the belief that God is God. He later said he was the most reluctant convert in all of England. In more recent times, agnostic A.N. Wilson shook the entire world when he announced to the world on Palm Sunday 2009 that he was renouncing his atheism and returning to historic Christianity. In a letter he penned to the newspaper on the Saturday before Easter 2009, and I remember reading this letter to you all, A.N. Wilson wrote, "My own return to faith has surprised no one more than myself. My belief has come about in large measure because of the lives and examples of people I have known, not the famous, not saints, but friends and relations who have lived and faced death in light of the resurrection story, or in the quiet acceptance that they have a future after they die. The Easter story answers their questions about spiritual aspects of humanity. It changes people's lives because it helps us understand that we, like Jesus, are born as spiritual beings." This experiential argument, let me say it again, isn't limited to any one geographical region, any one time period in history, to any particular race. The Christian message is transcendent. People everywhere in every circumstance have found God, even when they weren't looking for him. Evolution has no answer for that. Why do so many people find God if he doesn't exist? And so that brings us down to the question, where does the evidence lead us? Remember, we can't prove there is a God. The atheist can't prove there isn't a God. But the question is, where does the evidence lead? Does the evidence, the very best evidence, argue for or against the existence of God? You know, every day we are forced to make decisions based on the best evidence available. For example, let's just say that you prefer sweetened iced tea. and somebody sets in front of you 2 glasses of iced tea, and they said, now I put a sweetener in one of them, but I can't remember which one. Your chances of picking the sweetened tea would be 50-50. But even if you picked the wrong glass of tea, it wouldn't be that big of a deal if you had to drink unsweetened tea. But just suppose your host said to you, here are 2 glasses of tea. I accidentally dropped a cyanide tablet into one of them. How much evidence would you require before you felt confident enough to take one of those glasses? Now listen to this. The legal scholar Mortimer Adler concluded, more consequences for life and action follow from the affirmation or denial of God than from any other question. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the bottom line question. Does God exist? Where does the evidence lead you? What decision are you going to make? To ignore the evidence that we've looked at today for the existence of God is to, like one person said, slide into eternity with your fingers crossed, hoping you're right. What sane person would ever make that choice? The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. We can't prove the existence of God, but when you add up all the evidence, the cosmological, the teleological, the anthropological, and the experiential, I believe it clearly points to the reality of God. Well, in recent decades, I've become increasingly aware of an alarming fact. More and more Americans, both Christians and non-Christians, are embracing the idea that all religions are equally valid. So, is Christianity really the only right religion? Or are there multiple paths to God? Stay tuned for a preview of what's coming up next in our series, How Can I Know? Only Christianity is spelled D-O-N-E, done. Everything we need has been done by Jesus Christ. That's why he said, tetelestai on the cross, it is finished, paid in full. And perhaps that's worth applauding for.
Join us next time for the message, How Can I Know Christianity is the Right Religion? Here on Pathway to Victory.